sometime expeditiously at near the end of this week or the first of next. But we need to understand a little bit about some of the issues in the 13 budget. I want to take a minute to recognize Regent Hooks. He is here today. Thank you very much, sir. Glad to have you with us. It's a change from the Senate, is it not? I thought it might be a pleasant change, I assume. Well, thank you for being here with us today. You certainly can.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We do have a lady, Mary Transu. Mary, why don't you stand up and let's recognize her. She's with the new University of North Georgia, Chancellor. So
Nice to meet
just
you.
wanted to recognize her for being here.
Thank you, Chairman. Let's get started. We'll start with Chancellor Huckabee. Are you ready, or whoever's going to present for you? You get close to retirement, and you act like you could act like that. Is that what he says? Well, we were going to ask you about that fancy printer that we've funded for you over the last few years. With how many colors does it have? 87. That's two sides. Okay, nice to know that the Regent system is being conservative with those fancy printers that we provide. Several $1 million for that printer. There was a copy or something like that. I think you'll yield to Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown, we're glad to have you here. Dixon, who's the analyst for our committee this year. He's new with this committee, but not new with the House Budget Office. I think he'll be a great addition to us. So, and let me quickly introduce the members of the committee, or let them introduce themselves. Just start on the end down there. We have some new members.
Sheila Jones, State Representative for District 53, part of Fulton County and Cobb County.
Representative Barnes. Chairman Barnes.
Thank you, Buck. Mr. Chairman. John Burns, District 159, down in southeast Georgia. Glad to be on the committee, Mr. Chairman.
Glad to have you, Chairman.
John Yates, District 73, represent Spalding, Fayette, and Henry County.
And my vice chairman.
Mike Chokus, District 138, Sumter County, Sly, Marion, and Chattahoochee.
Okay, you want to introduce yourself, Chuck? Another new member of the committee.
Yes, sir. Chuck Williams, House District 119, Athens, Clark, and Oconee.
Chairman Rogers.
Chairman Carl Rogers, Gainesville, Hall County.
And the third new member of the committee.
Alex Atwood, House District 179, which is Glenn County, Brunswick, St. Simons.
I think Speaker's been very generous to us. We've gotten a lot of, we've got 3 new members, and I'm glad to have them. Did I give you enough time to get yourself ready and get your act together, Mr. Brown? Okay, glad to know. What, you want to try again?
to fill up some of the water tanks, take advantage of the workers and also take that off. The next two columns is the budget liability. This is where additional use out of our budget. On the other side, there are some things back to the 2.7%
Thank you, John. I appreciate that. Members of the committee, as usual, when John Brown does make a presentation, the numbers are right in front of you and they're very clear. So, as always, I'm appreciative of that. Let me ask you a couple things. First, I want to ask about the effect on the special funding initiatives you've got there. You take a $565,000 cut. Is that any one initiative, or is that a pro rata share across the board for each one, or was? Will you provide us another list of those individual initiatives? And this goes back to begging the question. I think there's, from the conversations I've had, I think there's some interest in trying to do some alleviation with the cuts you're talking about with George Cadet. But that means that you've got to find the money somewhere. And that's what I'm asking. Where are the dollars to mitigate that? And rather than have this committee serve them up, it's generally my experience that people prefer it, whether if we don't just unilaterally come in and say, okay, we're going to take it from that. I'm asking those of you who are wanting to cut to at least offer to us where that money is, whether it's in, there's some big pots there, 18 million in special funding initiatives and those types of places. So I'm just asking where that may be. Okay, well, I figured he might have an idea where he wanted me to take it from. In the formula, teaching. So it'd be across the board. Everybody on the committee understand the calculus? Yes, sir.
John, I know when you were our budget analyst, we always look for lapsed funds. Is the Board of Regents, are they immune from lapsed funds or not?
Carry forward.
Okay.
And I'll tell you that at the end of this year, I'm sure we'll have some carry forward.
So you don't lapse the funds, you carry them forward, right?
We can carry some forward, but we do lapse
3%.
anything in excess of 3%.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, another question. The teaching program, when you're talking about 76,000, the $76 million, how do you enact that? What do you do other than furlough days? Do you actually?
The way when we told the institutions that the governor had asked for 3% cuts and that we strongly suggested that they hold more, we tried to put out rules, and I think they followed them, that they would try to minimize impact on students in terms of cutting classes or loading up classes and so forth. So we asked them to do the looking at priorities, and if there's some low priorities or low enrollment programs or anything that they could do to try to eliminate those first. If there were vacancies or any positions that were more of a support position instead of direct classroom, to target those. Instead, carry forward funds as a one-time bridge for the amended budget. If they had any anticipated carry forward funds, use those. So it's piecing a lot of stuff together, everything from continuance of defer some maintenance or equipment purchases to vacancies. And in some cases there were layoffs. In some cases some of the institutions did not have the kind of flexibility of others. So we had some institutions that were eliminated.
Further question, Mr. Chairman? How many personnel are we talking about under the 40.17 teaching program?
You know, I'd have to get back to you to make sure I don't tell you wrong, but I would estimate that we have somewhere 40,000.
40,000 people. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions? Representative Jokes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John, from what I understand, enrollment's down from a high of 318 to 314. Has there been an equal reduction in faculty and staff?
There will be, and there has been some, and I'm actually glad you brought that up because fall of 2012, we did experience a 1.4% decline in enrollment as a system. Some institutions, especially those that are the traditional two-year schools, some of those institutions experienced declines of 5 or 10%. What that means for a given institution, if you're one that had a 10% decline in enrollment, you have the 3% cut plus the extra 2% for the 5 that's here. And then you also have the immediate loss of any tuition collection that went along with that 10% decline. And that's why trying to keep an eye out for a lot of our smaller schools with less flexibility, because it's not just the 5 that they've absorbed here, but also the tuition. Now, to your question, yes, there will be a corresponding reduction that will show up in the enrollment count with the 2-year lag. In fact, some people wonder, well, why we have a 2-year lag. The 2-year lag was built into the formula by design for this very circumstance. If you had a decline in enrollment, you had a little bit of a time to react. When our formula was constructed in 1980, the projection was that we were going to be in a declining enrollment environment. Instead, it did this, and so we forever were chasing and complaining about the 2-year lag. But now the 2-year lag is to our advantage because those institutions have a chance to react. But it will show up, yes. And the tuition side of it, let me point this out, that over time, our policy was once in the state that it was a 75-25 proposition, 75% state funds and 25% student. With the reductions in what we've been through, we, in essence, have a 50-50 proposition now between tuition and state funds. So the tuition side of the equation will decline immediately. The state fund side will show itself over the next 18 months to 2 years in the enrollment.
Thank you, John. May I have a follow-up?
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John, thank you for that answer. I've got one more question, and that's dealing with Georgia Gwinnett and the 2.7 million, which I think you gave an accurate description at this point in time in the budget process. It's extremely difficult to cut money that's already been spent. What figure would you say would be an accurate figure at this late date?
What I would ask you for is a number that's probably in the 1/2 range, 1.25 to 1.5. The rationale for that is that would allow us to at least not make them take a 5% plus a 7% cut. It would put it into where if they're taking the 2.7 reduction at 7% or so, at least that can relieve them of the 5%. One or the other, but not both.
Number as well, right?
That's right. Okay. That's right.
Thank you.
Any other questions for John? For John.
I mentioned, Mr. Chairman,
Sure.
one other thing I want to make sure full disclosure here to point this out. If I can refer you to your track sheet, and hopefully you have a page 64 of 65 in there, the bond section. maybe you don't. So take my word for it. There's a page 64, and on that page,
It's got that
if you were
printer in
looking
there.
at it, it has two items. One of the items is, well, both of them are where two bonds are being repealed, reauthorized. One of them is $2.3 million in 5-year bonds. It is the education classroom building. It was money for equipment for that building at Kennesaw. The rationale given for that was that the building itself and construction came in so under budget that there was enough money available to handle the equipment. I've not heard different from anyone at this point to suggest that they can't handle it. And then the second one that the chancellor might want to speak to, there's deauthorization of $500,000 worth of bonds that are 5-year bonds. This is the money that was designed for what was at that time being the Ray Charles Fine Arts Center in Albany. The $500,000 is a piece of a bigger block of planning money, some of it already out the door. What we would ask you to consider there is perhaps being able to put that $500,000 in bonds back. The debt service on it is about $120,000. The reason for that is while the Ray Charles sponsorship may not be there, we don't want to bring that to a complete stop on that and interrupt the planning and have to pick it back up. It's still on the agenda.
Thank you, Joe. I think that was pretty good.
I'm trying to catch up on that. I understand the premise. I guess where I'm trying to get my mind wrapped around that particular project for Albany is it's not a minor nor a major currently. You're saying what that, so this 500,000 is the planning, the pre-planning for an anticipated project. Okay, what's the overall size of the project that would be? Is that a $25 million overall? Familiar with that issue. Okay. But we haven't anticipated any design funds nor construction funds other than these are full design or these are pre-design funds? As a big major. Okay. Let me ask one more question of you. I have done some research on that deauthorization. Interestingly enough, with Kennesaw, and I do understand that they can handle the differential. The only concern I have about this type of deauthorization, it seems to create a disincentive for those to come in under budget and on like that. that sets up a little bit of a, they'll cover it, but what happens next time when somebody else comes in, looks like they're going to come in under budget? Does that, you don't get your equipment if you come, it just, I'm trying to understand, it seems to me we're creating a disincentive for coming in under budget. If we're going to deauthorize equipment, if you do, no, I'm sorry, back to the Kennesaw. They can handle it because they did come in under budget. With construction cost. No, I was more editorial on my part. Thank you, sir. Any other questions for Chancellor? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, to John Brown, and I know, Mr. Chairman, you're working on the library issue. And I know you've got some issues you're going to try to work on, I think, on...
We're going to hear from libraries during the 14 conversation,
Okay.
and we're going to look at all of those. It is under the Regent's budget, but we generally
Okay.
look at them as a different and separate, and there's nothing for libraries really in 13.
Yeah,
But we can talk about it. I mean, it's certainly not something we...
I must have worked with you all too long because
You did.
I was about to speak about libraries.
Okay.
Just real quick to say that they are part of our family now in Regents, but yet sometimes whenever we go through things like that, we gloss over them a bit. They are taking their 3% reduction along with our other programs, and I know Lamar's here. My assumption is that their way of getting that money is vacancies or some personal services or not buying some library materials.
Go ahead, Lamar, if you want.
Yes, the 3% is most of it goes out. That's a very large part of our budget. Over 90% of our budget goes out as far as grants are concerned to the individual public libraries, and they're taking it as each one's taking it 3% as they have money left to bring programs. So each library system gets to decide whether it's coming out of the materials budget or their maintenance operations, or in some cases their salaries made up. Some library systems are making furloughs made up the difference in that 3% that we have. So they are doing that. But I look forward to discussing with you.
I'm not sure. How many libraries are there in Georgia now? Public libraries are supported?
There's 61 systems, but inside those are close to 400 individual library buildings.
Okay. All right. And I got just one other note I want to mention, that the Higher Education Funding Commission is making the recommendations for the outcome. So many of these things we're talking about with formula are going to be changed. Members of the committee begin thinking it's going to be my understanding, Chancellor, it's going to be a revenue neutral based on 14 is somewhat where we are now, or where the formula will start. You got to have a baseline. Okay. So just in your thought processes as we discuss today's formulas, 13, 14, be thinking about where we're going to be going in the context of all your decision making. That's all I was saying. I think the Regent's done a great deal of planning. I'm truly supportive of where you're going with that. I just want to bring this to the committee. We have 3 new members of this committee. I want everybody thinking about the same type of thing. Mr. Chancellor, is there anything else from that you want to get to? That's fine. Thank you, Mr. Chancellor. Appreciate that.
Just like to mention too that Regent Cook is here. I'd like to recognize him.
I recognized him before you got here. If you got here on time, you wouldn't have to worry about the...
I've been trying to teach him this budget thing, you know.
Yeah, he needs only 45 years of training. We're good. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Okay. Let me, and I don't want to put the OPB on the spot, so I think it might be valuable to this committee. Who's here? Oh, there you are. I'm sorry. I'm looking right at you. It might be valuable if you guys could give us a basic primer on why you made the cut to Georgia Gwinnett and what your metrics were and why that was available. If you want to speak to it, I'd be glad to try to understand the rationale for that, or if you can provide it later to the members of the committee so that as we go through our deliberations, it was a recommendation from our governor's office. I'd like to try to understand what thought process they had when you guys were going through that recommendation. That's fine. I don't want to. Okay. I'm sorry to put you on the spot. It just dawned on me that you were probably out there. I'd like to. Thank you very much. I'll provide that to members of the committee so that we have all of the information we have. Anything else from the Regent system? Always. Any other questions?
Regent Hook, since you served with distinction in the Senate for, 30 years? 32, okay. Are you willing to give up your per diem serving on the Regent since you've sold your business and very well to do to help us out in this budget? I didn't ask that. That was a yes or no question. Do you plead the fifth? Okay. Okay.
He pleads the Georgia Constitution and separation.
I knew the answer. I just wanted to see what you said.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. All right, let's move on to Commissioner Jackson. Thank you. This TCSG. Commissioner Jackson, I appreciate you coming, and I haven't forgotten what I had to say in the other meeting, and I'm still trying to get my hands around why you have an 8.8 the way I figured between an 8 and a 10% cut when everybody else got that's in 14. So I want to talk a little bit about 14. I know you're 13. You're pretty much with everybody else.
13 is pretty much like everyone else. I'll be glad to talk to the specifics of it. There is a slight change from a 3% cut that we had planned for
to a 4.
We were told to a 4%. Our colleges will work hard to add that additional 1%. I think we can manage it with minimal challenges. There may be a few additional layoffs, rifts as a result of that 4%, but I do believe that that 4% is manageable in FY13.
I appreciate that, Mr. Commissioner. You have always come in and done what you were asked on those types of cuts.
Well, they're tough. They're very difficult, and as you know, we've merged 15 colleges into 7 over the several years. We have a merger going on right now, which will be implemented on July 1st at Central Georgia and Middle Georgia Technical Colleges. That has saved us $7.5 million over the period of the time that we've done that. That's one of the ways we've managed the reductions we've had. I will say that 14 is a lot more difficult for us than 13.
Okay.
And so when we're ready to talk about that, we can. It is true, though, that moving from a 3% to 4% in technical education, in that particular program, that's the one that's like the teaching program in the university system that goes to the colleges, that's about a $3 million additional reduction. $3 million between now and the end of the year is significant, but out of a some 296 million, we can manage it. It will reduce our carryover, the carryover that we get from tuition and from some fees, and that's a piece of legislation, again, I'll echo, that will come forward for both the university system and our system, that we would ask your support of during the session. And I know you're carrying that piece of legislation for us, Mr. Chairman. We appreciate that.
Glad to see that.
But it will basically cut into our ability to carry over tuition funds that will be used to cover some of the cost of that $3 million reduction. All of the other programs that you have listed on page 59, adult literacy, remained at a 3% cut that we had planned for. Department administration program remained at a 3% reduction, which we had planned for and have implemented those savings already. And Quick Start, we had planned on that. We have made some reductions in Quick Start to cover that 3%. So the only addition over what we had already planned for was that additional 1% in technical education. And I'll be glad to answer any questions that you have on any of this.
All right, well, I don't have any questions on 13. I do appreciate your willingness to absorb the other 1%. I think that, as always, it shows well for you. I want to start the conversation, members of the committee, with respect to the technical college on the cuts for 14, because we're going to have to spend some time understanding those. And I want to make sure that I'm understanding it. I've done some of my own research, and it looks like the formula cut just by itself is 10%. It's $29 million,
right.
$29.5 million.
Right.
And I need to understand. Well, I guess I don't want to put you on the spot with a rationale. That's where it is. But is that correct? Is it 20? Is that 10%?
It's 10%.
Okay.
It is 10%, and the rationale, which has been explained to me, is the basis that it is based upon our enrollment decline.
Okay.
That went from 195,000 to 170,000.
Well, let me ask you a very clear question then. The last time you received an enrollment increase,
yes,
for a form that was we gave you, I think, what was it in 13, 16 million.
You gave us 16 million in 13.
Which did not, and then in the previous year we cut you 62 something million. Well, you didn't. You had an increase.
When we had the enrollment growth, you didn't have the money to give us.
In other words, you
62
never
million.
got the money for the growth, but
That's
we're
correct.
cutting you for enrollment that you never got.
It is.
I'm trying to understand that method. Jessica, I'm going to put you on the spot again here in a minute because I need to understand how you can cut. You don't have to do it right now. How you can cut growth money that you never got.
It does feel that way. Yes, it does.
Well,
it does
feel that way. It
is.
That's what it is.
It is.
And that's okay. I just want to understand. Let's call it what it is, and let's move forward. But
we were expecting the 3% or perhaps the 4%. We'd already planned that we would likely get another reduction. We were hoping not to have the enrollment decline implemented. It is a historical fact, though, that it has occurred over the years that we do not get the enrollment growth when our enrollment goes up because we're in poor economic times when people come back and enroll in technical colleges. And the state doesn't have the resources to give us. And that's what happened with the $62 million. There just wasn't $62 million there to give us for that enrollment growth. And because we're on that 2-year lag that John so eloquently described to you, for us, that is really tough because when you're in bad times, we don't get the money. But when we are in a period of time when revenues are increasing, our enrollments are going down. So we tend to get our enrollment reductions and rarely get our enrollment increases.
I'm familiar with the history. And another question: we took about $10.5 million of cuts on the CDL program and other things in the 13 budget, if I remember correctly. So that mitigated some of that formula increase.
Yes.
I understand that we've added back to the CDL program and those kind of things. And that's great. I know you're appreciative of that. I think it's a good idea.
Changes for
high
the
demand
grant program that will help us with the CDL program, the practical nursing early childhood.
But
those
that
are
doesn't.
very welcome.
I mean, you still get the same amount of tuition from the grant whether state pays 100% or 0%.
That's true. We don't get any. If we don't get enrollment funding formula dollars, we get the same amount of tuition, whether it comes from Hope or it comes out
So
of
that
students'
basically
pocket.
affects those students and those programs and those campuses, not the
Yes.
rest of the system.
And what we can hope and we expect is that we will get an enrollment increase in those programs because the students will be able to have better financial aid. So we'll probably get an enrollment increase. We only hope that when we get that
It's
increase,
incremental.
that it will come with the funding formula funds. But that's a 2-year lag. So we won't get that for 2 years.
Any other questions, members of the committee on that? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner,
Yes, sir.
when you did the budget presentation, I could see pain in your eyes and on your face dealing with the Hope grant since we've changed it to a B. If we changed it to a C, would that take some of the pain out of your eyes and your face? And the reason I'm asking that is so many students are of that caliber. I'm not saying all of them are at a technical college, but
Well,
your thoughts on that?
my thoughts on that were at the time, and I continue to believe, essentially we changed in the second semester, we changed the Hope grant to a Hope scholarship because you have to maintain. Now, it's always been a 2.0.
Yeah.
It's always been a 2.0. If you didn't make a 2.0, you lost it. But we really are expecting high scholastic attainment. And when your average age of your student is 26 years old, many of them in their 40s and 50s who weren't in high school for a long time,
Sure.
and they're in our technical certificate program, maintaining a B average is not as easy. It would not be as easy for me as it might be for someone more recently out of high school and really prepared for college. So it was I understand a necessary change to get to the number we needed for Saving Hope. I preferred last year a 2.5. We spoke for a 2.5 rather than a 3.0. 2.0 would certainly take away a lot of pain, but the larger picture for us in last year and why we were supportive of making the necessary changes, Hope is so important to our students that even a reduction in Hope was better than no Hope and Hope going bankrupt. So we were willing to come to the table, and I'm still willing to come to the table and do our part. But if you saw the chart that we shared with you in the budget presentation to the Joint Appropriations Committee, our students lost 106, or did not draw $116 million in Hope grant funds last year that they drew the previous year. That's a huge loss, both to our workforce and to those students who didn't draw that Hope money.
And you said most of the students were unemployed as well. A lot of them were, I should say.
And we're doing a final analysis. We're putting the final touches on it, which we'll provide to the committee as we go into that 14 budget. Who those students were, exactly why they didn't come back, and the vast majority, given what we've looked at right now, did not come back for financial reasons. They just didn't have the money.
Okay.
They just didn't have the money.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Questions? Go ahead, Representative Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, do you think that changing, and I just as a follow-up to Chairman Rogers' question, that if we were able to address this issue of the 3.0 average and maybe bring it down to a 2.5, do you think that would have a positive impact in the growth of the student, the enrollment at the technical colleges?
I think you can't deny that it would certainly affect fewer students. We know that between 2.0 and 3.0, the ones that lost it between that 2.0 and 3 were 9,000 students last year. Going down to 2.5 looks more like 3,500 students. We think that would be good, but I also have the caution and said during the joint appropriations, we want to make sure who these students are and why they didn't return, and if it was money and if it was truly those Hope individuals, because I don't want to do anything that puts hope in danger again. I don't want us to contribute to that. So I'm willing for us to take some good time to make sure we know why before we make another change. But I do believe a change to a lower grade point average, whether it's 2.5 or 2.0 for the HOPE grant, is a policy that I think would be positive. But I want to make sure that it won't negatively impact our HOPE and the future of HOPE.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you,
Mr.
members
Commissioner, I
of the
don't see any.
committee.
Thank you for your
We
time, as
appreciate it.
always.
Thank you very much.
Jason, I'm going to ask you to do one other thing for me. If you'll give me an idea of what the rationale was on that particular cut to the formula, and how you really do get from how you cut something you didn't have. Fair enough. Listen, I'm impressed by you already for putting you on the spot. I didn't ask you to be here to do that. I should have. That's my responsibility. But if you'll work with me on that and the members of this committee, I'd be appreciative, because that's a tough one to understand. Thank you, sir. Members of the committee. All right. This is the posture we're in. We're not going to. Number one, we have to find out if there is any money to make a change before we can do anything. So, members of the committee, what I'll ask you to do is to think about what you've heard today, and I'll call a meeting as soon as I can get an idea on what may or may not happen with respect to some of these numbers, and then we'll pass this out. I'll also be bringing forward the carry forward legislation you heard a couple times, possibly at the next meeting. I just didn't want to get it caught up in the Mr. Chancellor, in the discussions on everything else. That's not going to be a difficult proposition. Anything else for the committee? I appreciate everybody being here. Thank you very much.